Located in a very seismic area that is one of the biggest volcanic zones, as well as in a region with one of the largest capitals in the world. You have a city that is known by many as a city of eternal spring, with some of the most beautiful gardens in this country. This city is full of history, both pre-Hispanic and colonial, where the famous conquistador Hernan Cortez built his residence. Thus why this city is full of architecture, including one of the oldest cathedrals to ever be built in the Americas, as well as museums and a hotel that supposedly housed many famous people. A place that, just like many cities in this country, has very delicious food. A place whose modern side also celebrates the beautiful nature of this region. A place that is near one of the most unique towns where you have to climb a mountain to get to a pyramid that is somehow related to an ancient alcoholic beverage. So join me as we check out Cuernavaca in the state of Morelos, Mexico, or Cuernavaca, as the natives call it. Our journey begins in the very beautiful and rustic Casa de Campo Hotel in the historic center of Cuernavaca. It is quite common to find these very beautiful rustic hotels in the colonial cities of Mexico, which tend to be more numerous in the central and southern part of the country. I was told that this hotel is roughly 270 years old and that it used to be a mansion. I even read up somewhere that many famous people and even some ex-presidents have stayed at this hotel.
¿Cuánto tiempo tiene ese hotel aquí?
270 años.
270.
Sí, antes era...
It was now time to hit the town and get something to eat before going to sleep. And I have to say, the city was quite alive with the holiday spirit. Interestingly, for a city that doesn't usually get any snow, there were some very beautiful ornamental displays. Being that Cuernavaca is known to be the city of eternal spring, you can definitely tell that they take pride in their landscaping. After this brief walk in the very lively city center, I found a very beautiful place to sit down and have a meal, and that is Mercado Comonfort. This place was basically a food court nestled inside a historic building containing a few bars and restaurants. As always, I prefer a view, so I decided to sit upstairs to soak in the ambiance from above. I ordered a steak-covered pizza, believe it or not, mezcal-flavored wings, as well as one of my favorites, which are garlic parmesan wings. We fast forward the clock because we have a lot to see in the city of eternal spring, and we start off by discovering more interesting aspects of the hotel I stayed in. From what I read, the Casa de Campo Hotel has been identified as a landmark by the government. The beauty of this hotel goes beyond its structure and history, as it also celebrates the stunning local nature. After all, Cuernavaca is also known to be a city of gardens. There were so many pieces of historical art that at times this place felt more like a museum. Even the area outside of the public bathroom was quite captivating. Once I arrived to the lobby, I was told that this hotel has one of the oldest elevators in the city and quite possibly one of the oldest in the whole country. So curiosity got the best of me and I had to check it out. Very old and very interesting elevator. Looks like this thing has been around for a very long time. Let's check it out.
Going to level 3. Let's check it out.
Needless to say, this old elevator was quite shaky, noisy, and slow, so I decided to accelerate the video a little bit. But of course, with such beautiful views, I was still enjoying my time. It was now time to leave the hotel and start discovering the city. And one of the first things I run into is one of the most famous cathedrals in the area that also happens to be one of the oldest in the Americas.
Here to the Cathedral de Cuernavaca. Let's check it out.
Shortly after arriving here, I ran into a very helpful tour guide that gave me a lot of interesting data, such as this cathedral being built in the early 1500s, making it one of the oldest in the Americas, as well as a very devastating earthquake in the late 1800s that knocked down the tower of this structure. Many buildings in Cuernavaca were also severely damaged in the more recent earthquake in 2017, being that this area is in an extremely seismic zone. This structure was supposedly one of the first cathedrals built to evangelize the natives after the conquest of Mexico in the early 1500s. The interior was even more beautiful than the outside in my opinion, but I was told by authorities that I was not allowed to record. One must respect the local culture and local wishes, so we move on.
Here in Cuernavaca. This is actually a really pretty street. Hello.
Our next stop is a locally famous and very beautiful museum in the center of town. For this, we walk a few blocks and pass the touristic sign for Cuernavaca before finally reaching the touristic sign for the state of Morelos, behind which we have this museum. From what I understand, this museum was initially a fortified residence built by the famous conquistador Hernan Cortez in the early 1500s. For those who don't know, Cortez is the Spanish conquistador who is credited with conquering the mighty Aztec Empire. This structure was then turned into a government building before becoming the museum we see today.
So translated this in English, this is the regional museum for all, I don't know for all, but for a lot of the little towns, little pueblos, little villages of the state of Morelos, which is actually not a very big state in Mexico, but it is a very significant state in terms of the history here. It is just south of the state of Mexico that surrounds, of course, Mexico City itself. The cost today that I'm here is 90 pesos, which is roughly $5 and probably some change with the exchange rate of about 17 pesos. In addition to the 90 pesos to enter the museum, I had to pay a 50 peso, which is about $3, no big deal.
The first section of the museum is dedicated to pre-Hispanic Mesoamerican artifacts. This area was supposedly one of the homes to the Olmecs, which is considered to be one of the oldest civilizations in the Americas. The name Cuernavaca itself is the Spanish pronunciation of the native word Cuahnahuac, which translates to place by the woods. Here we see a pronunciation of Chalcatzingo in various languages. And Chalcatzingo is a site of Olmec ruins in the state of Morelos that supposedly date back to roughly 1500 BC. To give you perspective, this was roughly the time when the city of Babylon on the other side of the world was at its peak. As we go towards the back of the museum, we pass through what seems to be a courtyard, and I could not help but get a strange feeling that I was walking through a place that used to be the residence for the conquistador Hernan Cortez about 500 years ago. When we get to the back of the museum, we come across an area displaying carriages that may have been typical in Mexico during the 19th century.
19th century, basically 1800s. type of vehicle that was very common here, and I'm sure a lot of parts of the world very similar. The gas lamp.
Being that the museum is elevated on the back side, you get a balcony that gives you beautiful views of the city. The indoor part of the back side of the museum is basically a natural history museum with interesting data such as the different types of foliage in the country. We are also exposed to the fact that Morelos is in the Trans-Mexican volcanic zone, home to the famous Popocatépetl, which at over 17,000 feet is one of the largest active volcanoes in the world. We even come across remnants of the mighty mammoth that may have been roaming around these parts of Mexico when the world was a colder place. We then move on to the second story of this museum, which is dedicated to the colonial era, spanning from the Spanish conquest of the early 1500s to the Mexican independence of the early 1800s. And one of the first things we come upon is an enclosed balcony that gives you stunning views of the city and the plaza in front. This area is followed by another area with many beautiful murals representing the arrival of the Spanish, which resulted in the conquest of the indigenous people and their lands. This event also brought disease to the native people, which decimated their population. Some claimed that millions died because of this alone. Sadly enough, the suffering for the indigenous people did not stop there, as many were grossly mistreated well beyond the conquest. And honestly, even though this art was very beautiful, it was a little hard to look at, being that it depicts so much human suffering at the hands of other humans. By the way, from what I read, these murals were created by the famous artist Diego Rivera. At this point, I was developing an appetite, so I left the museum, and one of the first places I ran into was this cute little shopping center. Despite its age, the place looked well kept and seemed to serve its purpose in the center of town. But of course, being that some of the best food is street food, I opted for that instead.
5 suadero tacos for 40.
From what I read, suadero meat comes from the area between the belly and the leg of an animal, giving it a very smooth texture. It was so tasty, I wish I had ordered more. And then I did something that I almost never do outside of the US, and that is going to an American franchise. But I was very curious to see what a McDonald's burger in Mexico would taste like. Not only was this McDonald's beautiful on the outside, nestled in a colonial building, but it was also quite interesting on the inside with its proud display of the state. I ordered a burger with 3 patties, cheese, and caramelized onions, which was a little different than what I was used to in the US. And to be honest with you, it was surprisingly tasty. Just like other cities I have visited, I wanted to check out the old market area of Cuernavaca.
I love these parts of town because it's more real. See a lot of local goods.
In my opinion, the old market area allows you to feel the soul of a city, being that you generally see less franchises, and I feel that in these areas people tend to be less pretentious, allowing you to absorb the culture more genuinely. Not to mention that sometimes you can find some interesting products and some pretty good deals. So with that said, let's enjoy some raw footage from the market area in Cuernavaca, Morelos.
Creo que no se puso. Ramen, sushi, dulces, hamburguesas, pan al vapor. Todo lo que se te antoja lo encuentras en la sala de
After discovering the older parts of town, I did want to see newer parts of Cuernavaca to get a more balanced perspective of this city. So we fast forward the clock to discover Averanda, which is one of the newer, most modern malls in Cuernavaca. And boy, was there a contrast. You can definitely tell that the beautiful nature of this region is also celebrated in this mall. And to be honest with you, for a moment, I felt like I was in an entirely different city. Built a little bit less than a decade ago, this mall is situated on the main highway that goes through the eastern side of town. And it is very common to see beautiful new malls like this being built in newer areas of many cities around Mexico, as there has been a huge injection of wealth from the recent industrialization of the country. After roaming around in this very beautiful place, I happened to run across a vendor selling paletas, which are basically ice cream bars. And being that I love the dairy products in Mexico, I had to get one.
I got myself with a vanilla and a chocolate chip. Pretty good, I gotta say.
This ice cream bar is very different than the ones I'm used to in the US, as it was sectioned off into squares. And I have to say it was quite tasty and creamy. And of course, you know me, I had to find a place to get my matcha fix, and I did. A matcha cheers to this nice mall and beautiful country. Stay tuned for the second part of this video as we leave Cuernavaca and take a short ride to one of the most interesting towns in North America. This is the magical town of Tepoztlan, where you have to climb a very steep mountain to get to a pyramid at the top that was supposedly dedicated to an Aztec god. Because of this interesting feature, this town has become a popular tourist destination full of life, mouth-watering food, and beautiful cultural art, and even some other exotic things that you may not have imagined. If you find yourself in Mexico, especially Mexico City, and you want to know of a pretty unique experience nearby, then maybe this town is a place you want to check out. And I have a feeling that this episode will really intrigue you.